December 1976, Long Beach, California. A film crew is setting up inside a funhouse called Laugh in the Dark. They're shooting an episode of The $6 Million Man. One of the crew members reaches up to move what looks like a prop, a mannequin painted in glow-in-the-dark orange, hanging from a noose. Standard funhouse decoration. He tugs on the arm. It comes off in his hand. Inside the hollow where the joint should be, he sees bone, human bone. This wasn't a prop. This was a person. And he had been hanging there, passed from owner to owner, painted and repainted for 65 years. His name was Elmer McCurdy. He died in 1911. And this is the story of how a dead man became a carnival attraction that outlived everyone who knew he was real. So many years passed that the people who displayed him forgot what he was. They genuinely believed he was made of wax. Elmer McCurdy was born in 1880 in Washington County, Maine. His life was unremarkable in the way lives of the desperate often are. He drifted. He worked as a plumber for a while, tried his hand at mining. Nothing stuck. By his late 20s, he developed a drinking problem and a taste for trouble. He fell in with outlaws, learned how to use nitroglycerin to blow safes. But Elmer wasn't good at being a criminal. His heists were disasters. In October 1911, McCurdy and his gang robbed a Katy railroad train in Oklahoma. They used too much nitroglycerin. The explosion destroyed most of the cash. His share came to $46, less than most people earned in a week. 3 days later, a posse tracked him to a hay barn outside Pahusco, Oklahoma. The shootout lasted an hour. When it was over, Elmer McCurdy lay dead in the hay. He was 31 years old. His outlaw career had lasted less than a year. Now, in 1911, what happened next wasn't particularly unusual. The body was taken to a funeral home in the nearby town of Pahusco. The undertaker, Joseph L. Johnson, embalmed the body using an arsenic-based preservative. It was a technique that would essentially mummify the remains. No one came to claim McCurdy, no family, no friends. So Johnson dressed the corpse in a suit and stood it upright in the corner of his funeral home. Then he put up a sign. It read, "The bandit who wouldn't give up." For a nickel, visitors could come see the dead outlaw who'd shot it out with the law. People came. They paid their nickels. They stared at the dead man in the corner. This went on for 5 years. McCurdy became a local attraction. In 1916, 2 men arrived claiming to be McCurdy's brothers. They said they wanted to give him a proper burial. Johnson released the body to them. They weren't his brothers. They were carnival promoters. And for the next 60 years, Elmer McCurdy would travel America, not as a person, but as a thing. He was displayed in traveling sideshows across Texas and the Southwest. Admission? A dime. See the outlaw who would not be captured alive. Through the 1920s, McCurdy changed hands. He was sold, traded, rented. Each new owner added something: a costume, a prop, fresh paint over the old paint. He appeared in a traveling crime exhibit, then a wax museum, then a haunted house. With each transfer, the paperwork grew thinner. The history grew vaguer. By the 1930s, no one who owned McCurdy knew for certain what he was. The story they'd been told was that he was a very realistic wax figure. The arsenic embalming had done its work too well. McCurdy looked artificial. His skin had hardened to a waxy consistency. His features had frozen into something that didn't quite read as human anymore. Through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, he kept moving. A warehouse in Los Angeles, a traveling show called the Museum of Crime, a haunted house in Mount Rushmore. Each time he was sold, he was further from the man he'd been. A coat of shellac, a new pair of glass eyes, neon orange paint to make him glow under black light. In 1976, McCurdy ended up at the Pike, an amusement park in Long Beach, California. He was hung in a funhouse attraction called Laugh in the Dark. The operators who hung him there believed he was a prop, just another piece of funhouse decoration purchased at auction years before. Nobody asked questions. Then, on December 8, 1976, a television crew arrived to film an episode of The $6 Million Man. They needed to reposition some props for a chase scene. A crew member grabbed what he thought was a mannequin painted neon orange. He pulled on the arm to move it out of frame. The arm snapped off at the shoulder. Inside the broken joint, clearly visible under the orange paint and accumulated wax, was a human arm bone, radius and ulna. No question what they were. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office was called. Medical examiners arrived at the funhouse. They removed the figure and took it to the morgue for examination. The autopsy revealed a mummified human male. In his mouth, wrapped in cloth and wax, they found a 1924 penny and a ticket stub from a traveling show. Further investigation traced the body's ownership back through decades of carnivals and sideshows. The trail led to Oklahoma, to a funeral home, to a train robber named Elmer McCurdy, 65 years. That's how long Elmer McCurdy spent traveling America after his death. Longer than he'd spent alive. He'd been a failed outlaw for less than a year, but he'd been a carnival attraction for more than 6 decades. Seen by thousands of people who had no idea they were looking at human remains. On April 22, 1977, Elmer McCurdy was finally buried in Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma. 66 years after his death, the state of Oklahoma ordered concrete poured over the coffin. They wanted to make sure no one would ever dig him up and display him again. But here's what stays with me. It's not the 65 years, it's not the painted orange skin, or the funhouse, or the TV show. It's this. By the time they found him, everyone who ever knew Elmer McCurdy as a person was dead. His enemies, his partners, anyone who remembered his face. He'd outlasted everyone who could have identified him. Who could have said, "That's not a prop. That's Elmer. I knew him." The story raises questions we're still uncomfortable with. Questions about how we treat the dead. About the line between entertainment and exploitation. Today, thousands of tourists visit places where terrible things happened. They take photos at execution sites. They buy souvenirs from the scenes of murders. We call it dark tourism. We've given it a name, made it a category. But does naming something make it different from what Elmer McCurdy's owners were doing? McCurdy's story is now a Broadway musical. It's a footnote in pop culture. Articles with headlines about the most traveled corpse in history. If stories like this one resonate with you, consider subscribing. We tell these stories every week, the ones that slip through the cracks of history. But what gets lost in the telling, what always gets lost, is that this was a person, a man who lived and made choices and died alone in the barn in Oklahoma. His life was small, troubled, marked by failure. He never robbed a train successfully, never got the score that would set him free. He died at 31, and then he spent 65 years as something people paid to look at. First a nickel, then a dime, then free with general admission to the funhouse. His price went down over time, literally. He was worth less dead than he'd been worth alive. Less than the $46 he'd stolen from that train. And here's the final detail that I can't stop thinking about. The reason they found him wasn't science. It wasn't investigation. It was accident. If that TV crew hadn't needed to move a prop for a chase scene, McCurdy might still be hanging there, in some amusement park, painted and repainted, forgotten. We like to think we'd know, that we could tell a real body from a fake one, that something that fundamental couldn't escape our notice. But for 65 years, nobody noticed. Not the carnival workers, not the amusement park staff, not the thousands of visitors who walked past him. He was right there, in plain sight. A real human body surrounded by fake ones, and everyone assumed he was the copy. Elmer McCurdy rests now in Summit View Cemetery. They put 2 tons of concrete over him to make sure he stays there. His grave marker doesn't mention the 65 years. Doesn't mention the sideshows or the funhouse or the $6 million man. It just says his name and the years. As if he lived a normal life and died a normal death. As if none of the rest ever happened. But it happened. All of it. And now you know. Sleep well.